Wait.
One. I want you to give it up at a certain point when you feel further. Get down. Jeremy, get on his back. Give a good tight hold, Jeremy. All right. Let's go, Brock. Keep your knees off the ground, just your hands and feet. There you go. A little bit left. There you go. Jeremy, good effort.
Keep moving, Brock. That's it. That's it. That's it. Keep going. I want everything you've got. Come on, keep going. Arms. Don't quit them. Your very best. Keep driving. Keep driving. There you go. There you go.
He's heavy.
I know he's heavy.
I'm out of strength.
Then you negotiate with your buddy to find more strength, but don't you give up on me, Brock. You keep going. You hear me? You keep going. You're doing good. You keep going. Do not quit on me. You keep going.
It hurt.
I know it hurt. You keep going. You keep going. It's all hard from here. 30 more steps. You keep going, Brock. Come on. Keep going.
Burn.
And let it burn. It's all hard. You keep going, Brock. Come on. Come on. Keep going. You promised me your back. Your back. Don't stop. Keep going. Just stop. Who are you? Keep going. Come on, Brock. Give me more. Give me more. Keep going. 20 more steps. 20 more. Keep going, Brock. Give me your back. Don't quit. No. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Don't quit. Don't quit. Don't quit. Brock Kelly, you don't quit. Keep going. Keep going. No, Brock Kelly, you don't quit on me. No, you keep going. You keep going. Go, Brock. 10 more steps. 10 more. 10 more. 10 more. Keep going. Don't quit. Give me yours. You can. You can. 5 more. 5 more. Come on, Brock. Come on. Don't quit. Don't quit. Come on, Brock. 2 more. 1 more.
Look up, Brock. You're in the end zone.
How many of you have ever felt like that in ministry? Like you're carrying a 250-pound guy, which that guy's only about 170 pounds, but you're carrying about a 250-pound person on your back in ministry. Feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? It took a coach to get this young man across the finish line. I had the privilege several years ago. I moved here from Nashville, Tennessee, and I had the privilege several years ago of driving that coach. I owned a limo company in Nashville and had the privilege of driving him when he came to town to meet Kirk Cameron when they were working on the film Fireproof. I knew it was Fire something. When they were working on the film Fireproof. And I got to spend some time with him and the wrestler, I can't remember his name, that does ministry with these guys. I just ate it up. I loved it. Enjoyed spending time with them. They're humble. They never got into this really to make money. It was a ministry from a church out of Atlanta. And so they just very humble guys. But what I love about this is sometimes we go into ministry blindly. Sometimes we tackle things and we start projects and we wonder, is this ever going to get off the ground? Are people going to support it? Is the church going to get behind it? Are the deacons going to get behind this? Are the trustees going to get behind this? And we sometimes we feel like we're going into things blind. But yet most of us don't know what it's like to have that person right here by your side. So I want to talk to you today about this idea. What type of leader are you? There are three types that I really want to talk about today. We talk a lot about a lot of different types of leaders. You can Google that. But to me, extrovert, introvert, and a visionary. Most people think that pastors are all extroverts. They're wrong. Majority of pastors, and I don't know what percentage that would be. It's probably something for one of those groups to come up with. But most pastors are actually introverts. I'm an introvert. I can get on stage, I can talk to thousands of people, I speak a lot with the military. I do a lot of marriage trainings with the military, a lot of leadership trainings. When I'm done and I'm off stage, I'm headed to my hotel room, and the do not disturb sign is on the front door. I've got to recharge my batteries. A lot of times extrovert pastors jump out there and they feel like they can do ministry based on their extroversion. And they throw things out and they go into it blindly. Introverts, on the other hand, sometimes they are afraid to try new things because we're introverts. What do you think Jesus was?
All three.
Definitely a visionary. But if you go back and you read parts of Jesus' story, I think Jesus was an introvert. He could talk to anybody. He could become whatever he needed to be. But at the end of the day, what did he do most often? Hey, you disciples, you go ahead. I'm going to go up on the mountain and I'm going to rest. See, I think that's the thing that we miss as pastors and as ministers is that idea of rest. Since I've been in school, I've been very careful to set boundaries on my time with my clients. We're seeing clients at Fort Hood, and I've been very careful to set boundaries with my time so that I've got time to study, time for clients, time for me. If you are an extrovert, sometimes extroverts have a tendency, they want to be around people continually. They're recharged by being around people. I've got a friend that lives in Nashville. If they're not around people all the time, constantly doing something, I'm like, you exhaust me. Just the thought of that exhausts me. And then there's the visionary. The visionary sometimes has got great ideas, but I wonder if they know how to lead and implement them. I'm a visionary. I'm not a detail person. I have to surround myself with people that are detail people. I had a VA, and she was virtual assistant. She was extremely good at that. I could send her something, say, hey, I need this put together, blah, blah, blah. Here's the vision. Got it. Done. I'm more the visionary. Awareness. As leaders, we've got to become aware. What are your strengths? What is it that you are good at when it comes to leadership? I had a church member tell me one time, he said, Scott, there's a couple different types of pastors. There's the pastor that's able to speak. There's the pastor that's able to go in the homes and do pastoral care. And then there's the pastor that just doesn't care. And he said, you've got the gift to speak. And I said, I don't like to be in people's homes. He goes, that's okay. That's okay. See, I remember years ago sitting down to dinner. We're from the First Baptist Church, and we just want to come and tell you how much we love you. And they invite themselves in, and they're all about it, and they don't know when to leave. They see dinner on the table, and so I never wanted to be that pastor. I think that being aware of what our strengths are as pastors and being aware of what we're really good at is important. I think on the flip side of it, being aware of what our growing edges are. I don't like to use the word weaknesses. Being aware of what our growing edges are. Where is it that we need to focus on? See, John Maxwell talks a lot about how the fact that we've all got growing edges, we've all got weaknesses. Most people spend a lot of time working on those growing edges. And they forget to focus on the strengths. They forget to say, I need to really hone in on these strengths because that's what I'm really good at. My recommendation is hone in on your strengths and find people, surround yourself with people that are good at your growing edges. Find good people to do that. What are you interested in? What are your interests? As a pastor, we've got a guy in our cohort that every time he does a devotional, it's all about evangelism. And that's what he tells us every time. I'm an evangelist. I love to be an evangelist. I just love that's all he wants to do. He doesn't really want to pastor. He doesn't really want to do, just wants to lead people to Christ. That's good. But as pastors, there's more to it than that, right? That's the ultimate goal. But we've got to lead them. We've got to lead our staff. We've got to lead our teams. We've got to lead our church. Being aware of the opportunities. See, sometimes I think we get honed up in this our little box. We don't want to come out of our little box. But there's a lot of opportunities to build networks. There's a lot of opportunities to build teams. There's a lot of opportunities that we can tap into that we never do. Being aware of what those opportunities are. Your team. Sometimes as leaders, we think that we've got to be the Lone Ranger. We don't have to do it all. As a matter of fact, if you try to do it all, you will burn out. You'll burn out quickly. As a pastor, as a leader, your team wants to be valued. Who's your team? Administrative assistant, deacons, the volunteers that show up every week, teach Sunday school, teach classes. They want to be valued. How can you show them value? What's the commitment that you need to make to your team? Are you in or are you out? Are you behind them? Are you for them? Are you with them? If they disagree with you, is that okay? They're still going to be there. Having integrity with your team. None of us like to admit that we're wrong, do we? That's hard. Well, what happens when you go back to your team and say, you know what, y'all had this idea and I totally took it and ran with it and it flopped and it's my fault. Or, you know what, all 30 of you told me that this wasn't going to work and you've been here longer than I have and I still did it anyway and it flopped. I was wrong. Having integrity. That will get you further with your team than anything else. Influence over your team. One of the definitions of leadership is influence. According to John Maxwell, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. You've got a direct influence over your team. Your team is watching you. I'm a CPE supervisor, clinical pastoral education. I train chaplains to be chaplains, and I do that online. And I had a student call me the other day, and he said, your class is on Monday. I'm in California. I'm on staff at a church. The pastor's older, and it meets about 3:30 his time in California. That cuts into my workday, and my pastor won't let me do that. Your pastor won't let you do something that's ministry related that will benefit him and your church? Are you kidding me? I really wanted to say, let me have his number. Let me call him. It's an 8 to 5. If you're not in the office for 8 to 5, the pastor wasn't happy. What kind of leadership is that?
One of those jerks you talked about earlier.
Definitely one of those jerks. In the military, we teach a program for couples that are actually for singles. It's called How Not to Marry a Jerk or Jerkette. And I think that guy was one of the ones that they wrote about in that book. You've got an influence over your team. Imagine what this young man, that ironically is working on his doctorate through Gateway Seminary, in ministry, and going to provide ministry to the church. Empower your team. I think that's probably one of the hardest things that we have as pastors to do. What does it look like with the finance team? Empower them to make decisions. Empower them to speak up. Empower them to bring great ideas. The personnel team. I heard a story the other day, or I read a story the other day about this teen church that had a staff position open, and it was like a children's director, and woman wanted to apply for it, and she submitted a resume, 4 rounds of interviews. They threw her resume out immediately. 4 rounds of interviews. You want to know who threw the resume out?
Pastor.
The pastor.
Yeah,
The pastor threw it out. The personnel team decided to take empowerment upon themselves and hire this young lady, and the pastor left. So be it. You're out of here. The pastor left. The planning committee. Remember that visionary that I talked about? How many of us as leaders, we get into the position of the church and we decide, you know what, things are going okay, things are going well. I'm not really going to push the envelope very far. Brian over here is interim pastor of a church up in Waco. And when he got there, I think I was there one of the first Sundays that you got there, and there were, 7 people in the church. About to close the doors. They called him to be their interim pastor, knowing that he wouldn't be there very long. And one of the things that Bryant went in and did was begin to create some income-producing opportunities. See, that's a lot of times where pastors mess up. They don't realize that there's also a business related to this process. He began planning for his successor. I want to leave this church better than when I came. Since he's been there, they're now up to about 30 people on Sunday. They've got a Parents' Day Out program that they're getting ready to start, and they've got a secretary that's part-time. None of that was in place before. He began to put teams together to empower them, lead them, and encourage them to plan for the future. They were just trying to get by. If we can just make it to next Sunday, if we can just make enough money to keep the lights on to next Sunday, we're good. And Bryant went in and said, no, we're going to start planning for 2 to 5 years down the road. Now, he and I are very impatient. We want it now. So it's been a little bit difficult for him because he wants to see instant growth and instant gratification. And so we talk a lot about that. That's kind of our style. I came up with 7 deadly sins of leadership. Trying to be liked rather than respected. We've all met that pastor, right? Wants to be liked. They're willing to say or do whatever it takes in order to be liked. Not asking team members for advice and help. That will end your leadership in a heartbeat. In organizations, one of the things that I've noticed when I'm working with organizations is they will go out and they'll hire this high expensive consultant. And they'll bring the consultant in, maybe pay him 5, 6 figures. They'll bring the consultant in. You want to know what the first thing the consultant does? They sit down with the team and go, you tell us what's wrong.
Yeah.
And now the consultant comes back to the president or the CEO and says, look at all this data that we found. Do you know where he found that?
Yeah.
The team. They could have saved themselves 6 figures figuring that information out. I've seen churches do the same thing. They'll go out and hire these organizations to come in, pay them big dollars, when they could have sat down and had a meeting with the church members and done the same thing. Thwarting personal talent by emphasizing rules that think skills. How many of you are rule followers? I'm a rule breaker. Leaders break rules. We've got this saying in the Army that we like to kill people and break things. I like to stick to the second part of that. We like to break things. I'm going to push the envelope. How many of you have heard in your church, well, Pastor, that's the way we've always done it? Isn't it time to break the rules? Figure out a new way to do something? The way that you do church today is probably not the same way that you did it 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Is it? It's not for me. I grew up a preacher's kid. I don't do church the same way. Maybe it's time that we break some rules a little bit. Figure out a different way to do it.
Can I share something?
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
I would just like to, Scott, you got a great point there on trying to be liked rather than respected. Talking about the church up in Waco, when I walked in, we had a power struggle. It was a smaller church, we were in focus. Typically when you're small, you're focused on yourselves, not necessarily focused on the outside, what needs to be done. But the treasurer, remember Scott, the treasurer was there and they were like anchored in to the institution. And we had a come to Jesus moment, and it was almost to the point where I left the organization. Scott was with me many times, we talked on the phone. They were fighting back with me, but I remember how I felt though, because as a pastor, I want to be liked. I'm in a serving profession, and it feels good to know that the people appreciate and value the leadership, but that conflict was really difficult for me to kind of grow through and to realize that part of that leadership, like you're talking about, is that I have to be faithful with God's people, and that might mean key people in that organization are not going to like me, and I have to still get up on Sunday and preach through that instance, which was really difficult. So, that just triggered me when you put that point. It's a great point of moving past people's opinions.
Yeah.
So.
I remember Friday night, getting a phone call from Brian and him saying, I've been in the house of the treasurer all afternoon, and I literally had to be the tough guy. And it's not easy. And he had to make some tough decisions. And sometimes we got to do that in order to grow the organization. It kind of goes back to, well, she's always been in that position, or he's always been there, done that. Not keeping criticism constructive. I think that kind of goes back to we want to be liked, so we have a tendency to tell people what they want to hear versus what they need to hear. But we can do it in a way that's still constructive and make our point. Sometimes people outlive their job. Sometimes we got to make some tough decisions and move people out in order for new growth to happen. I had to cut the bushes in my tree in front of my house the other day so that new growth can take place. Cut back.
Hey Scott, what did you mean by emphasizing rules that thank skills?
Rules versus skill system. Implementing skills that we know we can do, but we focus on the rules instead of operating in our skill system, our skill set. We get stuck in that. This is the rule. We can't operate outside of that and tap into our skill set. Y'all feel free to speak up and ask questions and add stories as we go along. Not developing a sense of responsibility in team members. It's hard when you've got a church to trust that the team members are going to do the right thing. It's hard to trust that they're going to show up and turn the lights on. It's hard to trust they're going to turn the lights off and lock the doors. Those are just minor things. Developing a sense of responsibility. People want to feel and be needed. When they've got a sense of responsibility, most of the time people step up. Not always, but most of the time. Treating everyone the same way. If you try to treat everybody the same way, you are going to lose. You're going to lose every time. And I think this last one is probably one of the most important. Failing to keep people informed. People need and want that information. When they don't, they're like the guy in the football going blindly. When he got done, remember what he said? That was 50 yards, right, Coach? No, you went the whole length of the football field. You accomplished something that you didn't think you could accomplish. You did something that you never dreamed. People want to be informed. Where are you going? Where are you taking them? And here's the way I look at it. If you're not keeping them informed, you're probably not taking them anywhere. You're staying stagnant. Too many of our churches today are staying stagnant. I go to church at First Baptist, and I remember Tom came right at Christmas time and preached. And I don't know if you remember what he said, but he said that they had closed several churches in our association because of lack of leadership. Remember that?
Yep.
And don't tell him that that's the only thing I remember that he talked about. Well, that he was from Jacksonville, Florida, because that's where my family went. But that stuck out with me like a sore thumb. We're closing church doors because we don't have leadership. Now, is that because people are not being called to ministry and going to seminary? Is it because people are not stepping up? Is it a combination of several things? I think it's a lack of visionary in a lot of leaders.
I think that you just said two things that are key to that statement, failing to keep people informed. And the fact that churches are closing from lack of leadership. If you're a leader, it's your responsibility to keep yourself informed on leadership. And these people who are here today took advantage of something that was being offered. I am reading something, taking a class, doing something every single chance I can get.
Right.
And it's not because I think I'm a great leader, it's because I know I'm not, but I want to be. And so you've got to be, like you said a while ago, we don't do church the way we did 20 years ago. Well, those leaders were.
Yeah,
They're not up to,
changing.
well, they're not up to the times. They're not informed on what's happening now, what's going on now. You know, I think that's tied in together.
And how many times have your church members gone and visited another church to see what's going on? Gone to another city with a thriving church to see what they're doing different. A lot of pastors are insecure and go, well, we don't want you to go visit them. Yeah. Yeah, I'm from a town, Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and I attended a church there that started out as just in somebody's home. Now they're running over 3,000 people. They've got Natalie Grant leading music on Sunday. They've got some major artists that are leading music. They're not doing church traditional. They've got 3 services on the weekend. They're all just alike. All 3 services are the same service. Saturday night, Sunday morning, and Sunday night. Because they're trying to reach the different markets. Every waiter and waitress in Nashville is a starving artist. And so they're trying to reach those waiters and waitresses that are working until 2 and 3 o'clock on Saturday night. They're not going to get up and come to church. They're doing church different. Is it right? Is it wrong? It's right for them. It's right for them. I wrote a book called Living Your Life in Peak Performance. And you saw my logo up there earlier. That's kind of my thing. I want to build peak performers in leadership. I want to build peak performers in ministry. We don't think about being peak performer pastors, do we? Probably never heard that term associated with being a pastor or a minister. I see a lot of ministers that are just content. They get into the zone. I talk about 3 zones, and I'm going to just kind of briefly touch on these, but they get into 3 zones. They get in the zone of contentment. Hey, things are going okay. We're not necessarily growing. We lost 2 members because they died last year. We're good. Nobody's leaving. The bills are paid. But we're not doing anything. We're completely content right where we are.
Or what they'll say is it's quality, not quantity.
Exactly. And that's lazy.
That's what I say.
It's one of the things that I've enjoyed about First Baptist Killeen is that almost every Sunday somebody comes down and joins the church.
Amen.
I can't think of we had a young guy Sunday on the second service. John, 15, 16, 17, something like that. I know the youth pastor met him. A lot of teenagers are coming to this church. And they're growing. I don't know about the early service, but
we have a coach that's going and picking them up.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we're making that effort.
doing something different.
Do something different. I mean, Matt came in and grabbed me and said, oh, my bus driver didn't show up and I had to go get him and rush back to get here. You know, he's willing to go the extra mile. He's not content.
He's not content.
Average. He's striving.
We've got those pastors that are content with being in the zone of average. And here's what I mean by that. They will start to grow, and they will get to a point where they're doing something a little bit different, go, all right, we're getting it. We're now getting there. We're over the hump. We're over the 6-month mark. We're getting some bills paid. Okay, I'm just going to back off. And they slide right back into that zone of contentment. So they step up into the zone of average long enough to make it look like they're making an effort, and then they back off. Then there's the zone of peak performance. We've all seen NFL football, right? We've all seen MLB. We've all seen basketball. Nashville was just in the playoffs in hockey. One of these days, they'll make it. Smashville. Bryant played college basketball. And we talk a lot sometimes about what that looked like for him. And one of the things he told me the other day, he said, if I'm not on my game, every single game, it shows. It not only shows on the scoreboard, but the fans see it, my coach sees it, and it affects my team members. He was telling me, he said, I used to watch film like crazy. He said, it's not necessarily about knowing what my competitor is going to do. He said, because once you're in the game, you don't remember the film, right? It's natural instinct. But if you're not growing and becoming that peak performer in what you do, your church will never grow. You see, your growth is a direct reflection of the growth within your church.
Your video proved that because they already saw themselves as failures
Yeah.
based on what they saw in the other team, not what they saw in themselves. And we've got to focus on our performance, not on their performance.
Yeah.
And so,
We can, and I mentioned going and looking at what other churches are doing. I'm always looking at what other coaches are doing. We're always looking at what other chaplains are doing and other chapels around the country. What can we offer? What can we do better? It's not about being them, because you're not them. They could have sat and held to the belief, we're going to lose this game because they're better than us. And I don't know if you watched the whole movie, Facing the Giants. If you haven't, it's a must-see. All of the Kendrick Brothers films are great.
the other day I was talking about church planting and leadership and what church planting is looking like in the future. And you taught our CPC class a couple weeks ago, and I was on a board discussing future church planting with this board of directors that I serve on, and they said, "But Carl, those other churches and their pastors aren't like your church, and they're not gonna do what you did." And my answer to them was, then forget them. And we cannot base our performance on what other people aren't doing.
Right.
Visionaries are looking at what is the future, not what's going on around them. And so I really do believe that peak performance part, I'm into church planting, and I do exactly like you're talking about. I'm looking all around me, but I'm staying focused on where I'm supposed to be. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's the reason why I really do believe with all of my heart that if we're gonna advance in our leadership, we do need to see what's going on around us, but we still need to stay focused on what we're called to do. And so, I think that that's great. You don't remember that film when you're on that court.
It's football. He's not much of a. It's, if we are growing as individuals, if we're growing as leaders, we're stretching ourselves, we're pushing ourselves, we are growing, guess what's going to happen with your church? It's going to grow. I promise you. But if you are content, it's not going to grow. Go ahead, Tim.
Correlating that with your growing edges, I remember the phrase of somebody saying, if you surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, you've just proven that they're not. Because if they're smarter than you and they're at their peak performance in their lane and you're in your lane, somebody else, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and then prove they're not.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Scott, if I could add to that too, it's so funny, you mentioned about playing ball. I would say, you know, it's also helpful to play through the mistakes.
Mhm.
I mean, I think a peak performer, you have to, and I would say in ministry, I correlate that to playing through the woundedness, because sometimes things can be said that can be hurtful, but how do you continue to play the game? I remember one time, my coach, when I first got to college, I came out of Hawaii, and in my mind, I was all American coming out of Hawaii, and I thought I could play the game. I wanted to show my coach that I could do something pretty fancy, so I had a breakaway layup. I should have just laid the ball up and did what I wanted to do, but I tried to do a no-look pass behind my head to our big man coming behind me to show some creativity. Well, he missed the pass, turnover, ball going the other way, and I ran out and smacked the mat in frustration because I wanted to. The coach stops the practice, calls out, gets in my face, and just rips me a new one. And tells me we don't want fancy stuff. Just play the game and do it the right way. And I remember how I felt. But then the next day he came to me and kind of instructed me and encouraged me to keep on playing. Play through your mistakes. That's what he told me. If you miss 5 shots, you shoot the 6th shot.
Yep.
Don't stop performing in the game. And so that was a big lesson for me. And I think that's great in ministry too. You got to play through the mistakes. You mess up, keep playing. Just
Yeah.
don't get discouraged.
How many of you have tried a program that failed? How many times? It's easy to want to go, well, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to get out of it. A lot of pastors are doing something else right now, digging ditches, owning lawn care businesses, which there's nothing wrong with those jobs, but they're not doing what they were called to do.
I brag on my teachers who try something whenever they fail.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and I point out, I said, at least he tried, you know.
Yeah, that's
He sank in the water because he got out of the boat, you know.
You never know. And it's, you know, we see people all the time. I see people all the time in my field, and they try things, and finally they hit that one thing. They finally hit their stride. And once they hit their stride, they're off to the races.
Well, it's like that 409 for me. It took 409, you know.
409
tries.
times? Yeah.
Yeah, because they kept going and it failed and failed and another failed, but
Yep.
you know, at that 409, it just worked, so that's why it got called.
Yeah. Anybody familiar with Mark Batterson? The author and the pastor from National Community Church in D.C.
Circle maker.
Circle Maker.
Yeah,
Wrote the Circle Maker.
Circle Maker.
My dad was stationed at the chief of chaplain's office. His last part of his career as a chaplain in the Army. And so he was there at the Pentagon. So when I would go visit, I would go to Mark's church. And one Saturday night, got to go and listen to him live, because they do a lot of video. Got to go listen to him live at Ebenezer's Coffee House, which is their godsend. And Mark is about as humble as you can possibly get, just a great guy. If you haven't read any of his books, I would highly suggest. But one of the things he talks about is the failures along the way. He planted a church in Chicago, I think it was, that failed. He went to D.C. on a prayer and a vehicle. Stepped out in faith, no income, no promise of anything, and now look where they're at. But he had to go through that failure. God didn't want him in Chicago. He had to go through that failure to get to where he's at. I can't tell you how many times I've failed. Can't tell you how many times it took me, and I'm still failing. And I will continue to fail. Maxwell wrote a book called Failing Forward. If you're not failing, you're not growing. Part of one of the things that I'm getting ready to kick off is the idea that ministers don't have a place to go to talk to other ministers around the country, to hold themselves accountable, to bounce ideas off, to go back and say, this is what I'm struggling with, to talk about the problems in the church, to talk about making decisions. When I did my CPE, I was pastoring a church at the same time, and one of my didactics was around claiming my authority in the church. And so I did all this research about claiming my authority. I'd gone into this church and I had lost my authority. Here's what I found out after doing my research. I didn't lose my authority. I never had it. I did not claim it from the very beginning. And I gave all of my authority to one lady. And she just about destroyed my ministry. She refused to pay me on time. By the way, she was the treasurer. You don't want to make the treasurer mad? She was the treasurer. She would make statements like, I will keep the doors of this church open if I have to pay for it out of my pocket. Go right ahead. I was having my third child. We were in the hospital. Hospital's calling down wanting the copay. I couldn't pay it. She refused to pay me. We had him on the 30th. They were calling on the 1st. Payday was on the 1st. And she refused to pay me. Finally, I had to go and claim my authority. She's dead now.
Well, you were sued.
Sometimes you got to take matters into your own hands. I started this off by saying that as pastors, sometimes we don't understand leadership. I didn't kill her, by the way. So you're going, that guy was killed back. No, I didn't. Somebody else in the community might have, but I didn't. We don't have that team to surround us with. One of the things that I've been putting together is a year-long mastermind group just for pastors and just for ministers. And I've been working on this for quite a while. I'm kicking it off in June. I'm going to mention it to you. There's no obligation. If you want more information about it, I'll stick around and talk about it. There's a small cost to it, but I'm giving it away practically to this group if anybody wants to join. It's a year long. We're going to meet twice a month via Zoom. So it's online, so you don't have to go anywhere. You can call in. But we are going to discuss topics of problem solving, authority, leadership, influence, vision, people, all those topics twice a month for the next year. I've got several people that have already joined that are going to be from around the country, some local pastors. Something that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to bring guest speakers in. Randy and I have kind of talked about working together some on that. Again, no obligation, but I've got my website there if you want more information or if you'd like to talk to me about it. I will tell you this, very inexpensive because I realize that pastors, and that's the other thing, is pastors don't typically want to pay for personal growth. And so
They'll pay for the lack of it.
they'll pay for the lack of it eventually.
Yeah, that's it.
Questions, comments, feedback?
Scott, one of the things I've observed, I pastored for 42 years. A lot of pastors are afraid.
Yes.
They don't want to walk the boat. They don't want to do anything that's going to cause trouble. And the other side of that coin is the things I did do in my years. Some people might have said they were failures, but I always saw the success in what we did. It may have been one person, literally one person reached. I'll give you an example. We have some bikers here. I had some bikers in my church in East Texas. And they came to me and they said, we're going to do a blessing of the bikes. I was like, well, what is that? And they expected me, I said, well, cool, let's just do that. So we promoted and brought in a biker club that was a Christian club. And we had literally one young man showed up on his bike. He was a man who was looking at trying to join one of the outlaw gangs. And that group of bikers led him to Christ. He was in church the next day. One person.
Wow.
Now to me, that day was a success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually when we think about success, we think of 30, 40, 50 people showing up.
They could be just one.
But think about this. When I was in seminary, we talked about centrifugal circles,
Yes.
and one reaches another. That one reaches another. About 10 years ago, I was sitting in a Panera Bread in Pensacola, Florida. A guy that I ran track with in high school, Shane Tucker, came up to me. Hadn't seen him in years. And he came and sat down and goes, you have no idea what I do today, do you? I said, no. I said, you were a genius in school, and I figure you're probably teaching math somewhere or college algebra or something. He said, no. He said, I joined the Fellowship of Christian Athletes because of you. and I'm a minister today. See, I was changing clothes one night after track practice to go. I was the president of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I was changing clothes, and he came into the locker room and goes, "What you doing?" I said, flippantly, I said, "We've got a meeting, Fellowship of Christian Athletes tonight." I said, "You ought to come." Just like that. He shows up. I was a senior. He was a junior. The next year, he starts coming. This guy came from an atheistic family. He starts coming on a regular basis. The next year, he was made president. He started going to church. He ended up going off to seminary and becoming a youth pastor. And I can't tell you how many. He's ignorance on fire. He knows no bounds. He goes after it. I can't tell you how many people he's reached. I didn't do it. And I flippantly invited him to come to FCA that night. He said, "It's because of your invitation that I'm doing what I'm doing today." You don't know what that young man's going to do. Look at the people that you've touched. Who influenced you?
I think success is measured in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
It can be as tiny as inviting somebody somewhere, or it can be as big as saving somebody. I mean, you never know, but it's, how you see yourself. Because, you can say, "Oh, I'm gonna do this," and if you don't get it done, it's not that it's not a success, but then you try tomorrow, and maybe you can do twice as more as, that you wanted to do.
Yep.
And I think it's just measured in lots of little different things,
I was in somewhere the other day, and I think it was with Chris and the church planning group, talking about if one person, each person brought one person, instant double. Kind of weird to think about that. 500 people, and if one person brought one person, 1,000 people suddenly in your church. Some of your church members would be complaining because they had no place to sit and somebody took their seat. And you got to deal with that. So, any other questions?
This may have been dealt with while I was out, and I've read, being a pastor for 30 years and been to John's conferences and read his books and everything. But we take it for granted, I think. But as I look back on it in my own life and ministry, it is my daily devotion with my Lord. That I have to begin with Him in leadership, and the Savior who teaches us about godly leadership in doing so, and that we would not lose sight of that, and with our heart and our love for the Lord first,
Right.
to our love for people, and as we lead. So I just throw that in because I look back on my life a lot of times that there were times that I did and failed in that area. Was not faithful as far as my spending time with the Lord. Not spending time looking for a sermon, as a pastor, but maybe not in my time just my personal devotion.
Yeah.
So,
And that's kind of going back where I started with Jesus took time out.
that's right.
And if you're not taking time out, and personal growth is spending time in the Word, spending time reading things outside of the Bible as well, and connecting the two. How does this fit? How can I apply this? If Jesus had to take time out, imagine how much more we have to take time out. Probably 10, 15 times more. Randy?
Okay. Thanks, Scott.